Women at Work, Creative Approaches to Female Economic Empowerment. I'm Daniel Wilkinson. I'm the Program Manager for Economic Empowerment for Switchboard, and I'm joined by Saba Imran, the newest member of the Switchboard Economic Empowerment team. Really excited to have her on board. She comes to us from the IRC in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and before that, the International Institute in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm also excited to be joined by a couple of guest speakers today that are going to be sharing about their programs. We have Nisha Washington from the IRC in Silver Spring, Maryland, and Helen Schweitzer, who's the Director of Resettlement at Refugee One in Chicago. So before we get started, just wanted to share a couple tech tips in case you're having any issues with the audio with your computer. You can call in by phone, and the information is right there for you, the phone number and the audio pin. So hopefully that's not the case, but if it is, usually the phone audio is pretty good. As we go along, please type your questions into the chat box at any time. I'm going to be monitoring those as we go along, and we should have a solid 20 minutes or so at the end for Q&A. We know that sometimes people attend as a group and not necessarily everybody might not be registered. So if that's you, if you wouldn't mind just sending us a quick email or putting it in the chat, put in your name and your email and sharing that with us, that'd be helpful just so we can track who all is here and also so we can send you the follow-up resources. Usually the first question is always, will the recording and slides be shared? The answer is yes. We'll be sharing those at switchboardta.org. Usually they're up within a day or two after the webinar, and not just the slides, but also the video recording. So what are our learning objectives today? Where are we going? By the end of today's webinar, we hope that you will be able to describe the characteristics of employment services that promote gender equality and gender equity. These are two things that I think we're all committed to, but we don't always have the language or the framework to talk about it or necessarily have clear ideas about exactly what those things mean. Secondly, we want to identify best practices and creative approaches to supporting the job readiness and career success of female clients. And finally, we're going to have a highlight of one alternative career pathway that may appeal to some female clients. Of course, there's many possibilities when it comes to alternative career pathways. And so what I mean by that is like microenterprise and different like in-home childcare, different types of pathways that might not be your traditional jobs. And so we're not going to be able to cover all of them, but we're excited to be able to share one program model and hopefully learn some lessons from that. So before we get started, we just wanted to ask a discussion question and get some interaction from you guys and see what you think. So before I hand things over to Saba, who's going to give us a little bit of a framework of gender sensitive employment services, I would just want to know from you guys, what are some characteristics of employment services that empower women, in your opinion? So just go ahead and type your answer into the chat. All right, we're starting to get some answers coming in. Child care services available. Thank you, Carrie. Equal pay. Monica wrote that in. Money with a smiley face. Daycare options. Healthcare. Yeah, these are all great answers. A lot of child care services popping up. No language barriers, transportation, sick leave benefits, educational empowerment, transportation. So there's a lot. There's actually too many. I can't read them all, but thank you. Thank you for all of your input and your answers. And now I'm going to hand things over to Saba Imran, and she's going to share with us a little framework of what we mean when we say gender sensitive employment services. And go ahead, Saba.
Thanks, Daniel. So thank you, Daniel. Hi, everyone. Today's topic is very exciting and personal to me, being a female and working within the economic empowerment team. Today, we will be discussing what gender equality and gender equity mean, review the definitions for both of these terms. We will also try to understand what the goals of gender-sensitive and gender transformative programs are, and most importantly, what it looks like in practice within employment programs. So let's start with gender equality. What does it mean? Despite a popular belief, gender equality does not mean that men and women are the same. Rather, gender equality promotes the idea that both men and women have rights, responsibilities, and access and opportunities in life. And these are not dependent on whether they are born male or female. When I was working at the International Institute of St. Louis, one of the tasks I was involved with was conducting interview practice for clients. During these sessions, I tried to ensure I got responses to my questions from both the female and male clients. We all are aware how difficult it can be at times to have female clients respond directly to our questions. I didn't realize at that time I was supporting gender equality, and similarly, I'm sure you are also promoting gender equality in your roles as well. Gender equity, on the other hand, refers to the process of being fair to men and women. In other words, gender equity is about leveling the playing field by addressing any imbalances in the benefits, opportunities, or resources available to male or females. Gender equity leads to gender equality. For example, an affirmative action policy that promotes increased support to female-owned businesses may be gender equitable because it leads to ensuring equal rights, opportunities, and outcomes among men and women. As you can see from this slide, the role of gender in service program can range from either being gender exploitive to gender transformative. We obviously don't want to be gender exploitive or gender neutral in our program. So then what does it mean to be gender sensitive and gender transformative? Being gender sensitive acknowledges that differences exist between genders without focusing on changing these inequalities, and actions and responses are based on these differences. So what this means to me is that differences exist in the genders and not working to change these differences. On the other hand, gender transformative programs actively seek to transform harmful gender roles, norms, and expectations. In an ideal world, we would want our programs and services to be gender transformative. And in a few minutes, I will talk about a few ways that employment programs can move in that direction. But the first step is to ensure that our programs are at least gender sensitive. Gender sensitive programs are programs that are designed with consideration of existing gender gaps, which respond to different gender needs and constraints. Gender sensitive programs acknowledge the role of gender norms and inequities and develop activities to adjust to or compensate for them, and do not actively aim to change norms, but strive to limit the impact of harmful gender norms. Again, all programs, we're striving to be at least gender sensitive. Whenever possible, employment programs should strive to be gender transformative, meaning they actively seek to address and transform harmful gender norms, roles, and expectations. And an example can be including activities for participants to develop awareness and question and redefine gender norms. And for us, in the context of employment, it will be goals and decisions. So what does this look like in practice? Here are a few practical steps that you can take to promote gender equality and equity in your employment program. We want to create opportunities for women to discuss their experience and provide feedback on the services we offer. For example, having female-specific focus group discussions or support groups. We also want to begin collecting gender-specific data on our programs in order to identify where adjustments may be needed to improve women's ability to access and succeed in our programs. And this can be as simple as having an attendance sheet to see number of females versus males who attended a specific program. If possible, offer employment services at times and locations that are convenient and comfortable for female clients. We also want to host occasional or regular women's job readiness groups that focus specifically on preparing women for the U.S. workforce. We also want to try to be intentional with job development efforts to ensure that we are developing employer partnerships at companies that align with the preferences and career goals of female clients. And last but not least, like Daniel mentioned earlier, we want to develop alternative career pathways. For example, a micro-enterprise program that allows women to capitalize on skills they already have. I'd like to mention here that these recommendations are taken from the newly published Switchboard info guide on the topic of supporting the career pathways of female clients. So I'd encourage you to go to the website and check that out after the webinar. And lastly, I hope this has been thought-provoking and useful in adding language to the work you are already doing, and thinking about the different ways we can create strategies to promote female economic empowerment. Yeah. So now we're just going to hear about 2 successful case studies, but before we get into that, we have an activity, and for that, I will hand it back to Daniel. So here you go.
All right, thanks, Saba. It's good to think about the framework that we're working out of and the goals that we have in terms of how we can empower our female clients. And I would encourage you guys maybe later on, after we send out the slides, to look at those bullets again, and also look at the info guide that Saba mentioned that was just posted to our website yesterday. You can find it on the front page. And just think about at least maybe one of those areas that that your program might be able to improve in over the coming year. So we're going to do a poll before we get to our case studies. And so you already see the question on the screen, and so you've probably already thought about it. So I'm just going to launch this first poll question. Has your organization implemented economic empowerment programs specifically focused on women? Yes, no, or unsure? We're going to launch that and go ahead and put in your answer. Right now we've got about close to 50% saying yes. All right, give you just maybe 5 more seconds to cast your votes. All right, I'm going to close this poll and let's share the results. Okay, so we ended up right at 50% for those who said yes, 31% for no, and 19% for unsure. So the 19% makes me think we need to clarify some things, and I hope that not only the framework that we just provided and some of the things Saba shared a minute ago, but also our case studies that we have coming up will clarify a little bit further for those of you who are unsure what it is that we mean, and maybe give you some ideas that that you can implement in your program. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hide this poll now. We're going to go back to the presentation, and I'm going to hand things over to Nisha Washington at IRC, and she's going to share a little bit about the Women's Employability Program at the IRC in Maryland. Go ahead, Nisha.
Yes. Oh, hello. So I'm Nisha. I work in the IRC Silver Spring office, which is part of a broader IRC Maryland office, which includes Silver Spring and Baltimore. I'm going to share a little bit today about our Women's Employability Program that was implemented in Silver Spring and Baltimore. We piloted for 1 year, and then it was implemented for 2 years. I apologize, this slide just went away. So the goal of the program was to basically serve women and youth with barriers to employment. So we only served or took people who had 2 or more significant barriers to employment. And the goal of this was to increase household income, decrease reliance on public assistance, and then also reduce feelings of isolation. So we did this in a number of ways. So we focus on economic self-sufficiency and community orientation. Economic self-sufficiency, we focus on providing individualized employment services, making sure that we were really focusing on the client's needs or the women's needs and being responsive to that when we were designing their individual employment plan. So the goal of the program, again, was to serve folks who were either underserved or were unable to be served by traditional employment programming. So our program was designed to basically take that into account. So if they needed a different sort of employment opportunity, perhaps an employer that was more flexible, gave different hours, that was more open to women who were pre-literate or had higher barriers, we were focused on obtaining those opportunities. With regards to community orientation, we held about 12 hours worth of job training classes that came with 12 hours of course interpretation. It was done in groups, typically language groups, but we did have like 2 language groups or 3 language groups going at a time. And this was to orient women to the job market, but also to introduce them to other women in the community. So the staffing model was 1 employment coordinator, so me, and then 2 employment specialists based out of Silver Spring and Baltimore offices. The employment specialists would provide things like job placement support, case management, a little bit of case management, pay reduction, and the coordinator would work between the 2 sites, managing the data and making sure cases were on track. This is an example of sort of our program outputs and outcomes, the goals that were placed upon us through the funders. So again, like each year we served about 140 clients. We were supposed to get 60% of the participants to be placed, and then 70 to 80% of job retention, and then 60% access to employment with benefits. We typically hit a lot of these numbers. The only issue would probably be with regards to accessing health benefits, because we're working with people with 2 or more significant barriers to employment. Typically, the type of employment we would find would be more part-time with decent wages or high wages, or full-time for folks who are interested in production opportunities. Most of the jobs that we found did not have access to benefits because of the need for flexibility. And a little bit about the kinds of barriers that we would see women come into the program would be things like lack of childcare. I apologize, I need to go backwards. So things like lack of childcare, lack of English proficiency, things of that nature. And so you see here, this is an example of 2 years worth of collecting data on the program. So you can see from starting from the right side is the amount of barriers folks came into, and on the left side is the remaining barrier. So we're able to reduce barriers for most of our clients. Again, many of them came in with compound barriers. It was really interesting to see that the key to success in the program was barrier reduction, making sure that if the client came in with limited English or a need for childcare, that we were able to either reduce that barrier and able to obtain employment. Not all people who came into our program were able to successfully complete employment, but we were able to at least reduce barriers. So we felt that probably the intervention for this client took about a year or so, or 2 or more years, and our goal would change based on that client's needs. And again, this was just to make sure that our program was responsive to the client's needs and gender sensitive. So here's an example of some of our outcomes. As you can see, we have with the majority, we had some full-time placements, but we also had several part-time placements. Key industries would be production, retail, hospitality, and cleaning services. So we did find that this was key to success. Working with employers that kind of had more flexible schedules, that were more open to entry-level employment, and that our clients actually wanted to work in. So we did have, some career placements in childcare interpretation services or administrative. The majority of our placements were in like production, retail. Again, retail because there's more flexible schedules, but there's also some customer service attainment, and then food service, of course, because there's more flexible schedules as well. We did have a really good retention rate. So if you see that about 90% of our clients were retained for 90 days or more. So that was really impressive. So once we were able to get someone a job, they did keep the job. And then we had about $18,000 annually that was gained in supplemental income each year. So an example of a success story we like to tell is Mylene Kuya. So she was a lovely single mother from Cameroon. She was a Asylee. She came to our program in the midst of a housing crisis due to the fact that she had recently had a child and could not obtain childcare. Because she could not obtain childcare, she could not work, and therefore she could not pay rent. So when Mylene came to us, we worked quickly with our case management team to help her secure housing, but also to navigate our complex childcare subsidy system here in Maryland. We were able to obtain childcare vouchers for her, help her with daycare, and then also help her find a survival job at the moment. So once she had obtained that survival job, she was able to enroll in English classes through a partner, as well as obtain her phlebotomy certificate through our career development program. In that program, she obtained a medical escort position that was paying a high level of wage. I believe it was $15 to $20 per hour, a flexible schedule. And now she's on course to continue her medical studies. She would like to be a registered nurse. And so we wish her the best in that, and definitely are here to support her. So that's an example of our program model. I think a lot of the learning that we took from it was the importance of monitoring, what's going on with clients, like what kinds of barriers are they coming into, how successful are our interventions, and if our program is responsive to their needs.
All right, thanks a lot, Nisha, for sharing your program and the success story with us. We are actually gonna go to another, oops, sorry, let me go back to that. We're gonna go to another poll here real quick before we start our next case study. I also apologize for there was a bit of a choppy connection on that last case study. Hopefully our connection will be a little bit better moving forward. We are trying to see what we can do to troubleshoot it, but hopefully we'll be good moving forward. So let's start this next poll. All right, so the next one is, has your organization explored alternative career pathways for women for whom traditional jobs are not a good fit? Yes, no, or unsure. Go ahead and choose your answer on that. And also, while you're doing that, I'll just remind you all, if you have any questions coming to mind, please type those in the chat. We are watching those as we go, and would love to be able to answer whatever questions you have, either on the framework that we shared in the beginning or about some of these specific programs. All right, I'll give you guys another 5 seconds or so for the poll, and we'll close that out. All right, so a little similar to before, we had 53% yes, 30% no, and 17% unsure. So that's encouraging to see that over half of you have explored, either are looking into it or have already started some kind of alternative career pathways program, or are referring your clients to alternative career pathways programs. We would love to hear from you and hear about your success stories and innovative approaches. So please reach out to us and let us know what you're doing in your program so that we can highlight that for the future. All right, let me hide this poll, and then I'm going to hand things over to Helen from Refugee One.
All right, thank you, Daniel. My name is Helen Schweitzer. I'm the Director of Resettlement at Refugee One in Chicago, and I'm going to be talking a little bit today about our vocational sewing program. The program started in the fall of 2017. It started out of a desire to provide vocational training and alternative job opportunities for a lot of the Syrian refugee clients that we had arriving late 2016 and 2017. we found that a lot of the Syrian women had trouble accessing these traditional jobs for cultural reasons. They were largely from big families, and so they had a lot of children at home, so childcare was always an issue. They had difficulty navigating transportation. Most of them had never worked before. So our hope was to provide a class that would provide them with some skills where they could earn income from a variety of different avenues. These different avenues included full-time, perhaps, in factories, part-time or full-time doing alterations in dry cleaners, in costume shops, things like that. We were also hoping to develop a signature product that we would be able to sell through our website, and also hoped to enable the ladies to take work home, which is what most of them wanted to do. So from 2017, the fall, we have had 86 students graduate from our classes. 95% of them have been female, and then we've had 5% of men. They have been from 18 countries. We are currently providing 2 classes, a beginner class and an advanced class. Both classes meet 2 days a week for 3 hours, and they are structured 12-week sessions. They are very employment focused. So we try and provide all the skills that they will need to be able to work outside of the class. We do also embed 1 hour of employment-focused English within each of the levels. Attendance, we try and keep it similar to having a job. We stress the importance of coming on time. If they are late, we have a late jar, and they have to put in a quarter. If they are not going to be able to come, they have to let the teacher know, and if they miss 3 classes without letting the teacher know, we tell them that they no longer have a spot in the class. We do provide childcare, and we do try and gather their feedback from the classes at our graduation. At the end of each session, 12-week session, we do have a graduation where we combine the beginner and advanced classes. And we do ask them then for their feedback, what they liked about the class, what would have made the class better, what they would like to learn next time. So we do try and empower them by giving them an opportunity to give us feedback on the classes. So we were hoping that the students in the beginner class would be able to learn the basic sewing skills using industrial machines, which many of them had not used before. Most of our students do move up from the beginner class and then complete the advanced class as well. And in the advanced class, we try and focus on professional alterations and creating garments from scratch. So right now, our advanced class is working on making a pair of pants. We hope that the women will improve their English skills by coming to the classes, and that they will gain a variety of skills through working on a number of different projects. We hope that they'll be able to work from home, work as a professional seamstress. We hope to reduce their isolation. We hope to be able to give all the students a new machine upon graduation. And we also hope that they'll be able to learn more of the resources that are available to them, such as visiting the library, if they are looking for a job. So to get started, of course, the first thing is funding. We applied for the LRS Integration Grant, which is a 1-year grant, which allowed us the opportunity to rent a space and hire teachers. So we also were able to secure a fund from Rivers Casino. They have a employment foundation. And so because of them, we were able to buy all new industrial machines, which was fabulous. The grant also allows us to buy the new home machines that we give to all the students upon graduation. The second thing we had to do was find a space. We needed something that was close to the office, preferably on the ground floor, so we didn't have to be hauling industrial machines up and down stairs. And we were fortunate enough to find a storefront just around the corner from our office, which has worked very well for us so far. The equipment we got, as I mentioned, mostly donated from Rivers Casino. We also have a large donor base at Refugee One, and so we get ongoing donations of sewing notions, fabrics, and pretty much everything we need has been donated. We were able to hire 2 part-time teachers, and we also have a paid studio manager who manages all the projects that are coming in. Students, we started off with just limiting our students to refugees. When the number of refugee arrivals dropped so dramatically in 2017, we were having a hard time filling our classes, so we were able to expand our student base to all immigrants as well. We have a great group of volunteers. We have 2 volunteer English teachers who come in, and then we have volunteer assistants in the class. So here are just some pictures of some of the projects that we have done, which will give you an idea of the variety of skills that the ladies have been able to acquire during our classes. We created a Refugee One tote bag, which was our signature product. The ladies also worked on creating a quilt, which was raffled off at our annual gala. They made some dog ruffles for a dog parlor, so after dogs get a nice bath, they could put on a pretty ruffle. We were commissioned to make a few t-shirt quilts, as well as some bomber jackets, which were a little more complicated. Our ladies also made some clothing for students, for clients. We made some eating cloths for a Zen Center. They made some dresses for an organization called Little Girls Dresses for Africa. And probably our biggest moneymaker for our ladies are these little bags, which you see on the right. We've literally made thousands of those for a local entrepreneur. We also have volunteers who offer additional workshops for our students. So we've had quilting and bag making classes, and this is all just a way to offer our students a variety of skills. Fortunately, in Chicago, we have a lot of employment opportunities. We have clients working full-time at Dearborn Denim, which makes blue jeans. We also have one of our most recent students who is now working at Nordstrom's as a tailor, doing alterations, and he's earning $20 an hour, which is great. We have people working at fabric stores, dry cleaners, but by far the largest number of our students want to work from home, and so they are doing projects for local entrepreneurs who have the vision and the dream and the ideas of the product, but just don't have the skills to actually make it. So they come to us and we are able to make it for them. Some of the challenges, of course, is funding. For us, the LIRS grant was only a 1-year non-renewable fund grant. So we do have a development team who are working on finding additional funding for us. Attendance, as I mentioned in the beginning, we had trouble filling our classes with only refugees, but opening that up to immigrants as well has helped us to be able to fill our classes. Space limitations is just the space that we have has now got too small for us. We have a number of projects going, and we would really like a space where we can have classes and then a production area as well. We've also had a lot of people asking us for full-time students, and we have found that most of our students really don't want a full-time job. They would much rather just work at home. The successes, there are so many. We have wonderful teachers and volunteers. We have more donations than we can ever use. The students just really enjoy the classes. They create a bond with each other, even though sometimes they can't speak to each other, but through being able to show each other how to do things in the class, they create a bond that has really reduced social isolation for a lot of our women. Employment opportunities are, we have sometimes more jobs than we have students willing to sew. And the joy of giving the ladies their first check was incredible. For most of them, they had never earned any money of their own before. So it was really a great moment to be able to give them those first checks. And some of them have really earned quite a lot of money. So this is just a picture of one of our recent graduating classes, showing our teachers, volunteers, and students. And it's a great program, and we hope that we can keep it going. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Helen. It was really interesting to to hear about the development of the vocational sewing program there at Refugee One. I've gotten a few questions so far, but I want to encourage you all to put in more questions because we have a generous amount of time available still for your questions. I also just wanted to quickly review the things that we were hoping to cover today. We wanted to give you a little bit of a framework of gender equality and gender equity, kind of all moving towards what we call gender-sensitive employment services. We wanted to talk about some best practices and creative approaches for job readiness and career success for female clients. And finally, we wanted to highlight an alternative career pathway. So I just bring those up now to just say that you know, if you feel like we haven't adequately explained any of this, we would love to have you type in your questions, and we'd love to discuss those things further. So just to remind you who we are, here's our pictures and names. So if you have a question for a specific person, just type in their name along with the question. I wanted to get started with one question that I think is pretty important. It's kind of a big picture question, but Nisha and Helen, if you guys would unmute yourselves, I wanted to ask you, in terms of your experience over the past couple of years of trying to not just make broad employment services work for women, but to do some really customized programming for women, what would you say have been the keys to success, or the things, if you had to give somebody 2 or 3 things, you know, what would you say? Make sure you do these things. Anybody want to take that one first?
Sure. I mean, I'll go first, unless Helen, you want to jump in. So I would say for us, the key to success was definitely to monitor and evaluate our programs. It's really important to, especially when we were implementing pilot projects, to really gather the data that's there and to survey the women, to collect anecdotal data, to collect success stories, and also to see what you're working with or who we're working with at the beginning of the program. It was really interesting because we had not gender sensitive at our location of the type. So when we first started implementing it, the model that was kind of given to us, we were encountering a lot of difficulties. So we at some point, you know, we had husbands coming in the office being like, why are you, you know, work, or being really, what we learned from that was to really listen to the community and to really make sure that our interventions were something that people wanted, and that we were strategic in how we implemented that. So we, in order to be successful, we really had to, you know, build bonds of trust with the community. We had to work with a lot of the husbands, and we had to provide things that were going to be impactful to women's lives. So for example, our classes were really helpful, you know, being able to socialize with each other were really helpful, and providing direct assistance so people could get to those classes was really important. So I would say the key things to success would be to continually monitor your program, to collect that data, to do that gender analysis, and to be responsive to what the data is telling you and to what clients are telling you.
This is Helen. Yes, I would agree with that. I think that most important is making sure that this is really what the woman wants, and getting the husband's buy-in, as Nisha mentioned as well. I think it's important to recognize that with moms, especially, if their kids are not taken care of, there's no way that they can do a job. So I know in resettlement, our goal is to get everybody working, self-sufficient as soon as possible. But I think it's really important just to recognize that this just doesn't work for everybody. So saying, you know, you have to take this job because otherwise how are you going to pay your rent? If their kids aren't taken care of, and if they're working in an environment that they just do not feel comfortable at all, it's not going to work in the long run. So you really have to create an environment where the ladies feel very comfortable coming, where their husbands feel comfortable with them coming. We had a lot of cases where the first or second class, the husbands would bring the wives kind of to check it out, make sure that it was okay. And once they were happy with it, then the women were happy coming along by themselves. So I think just really understanding the needs of the woman is key.
Great. I also wanted to ask you guys, what about adjustments that you've had to make along the way? Oftentimes pilot projects start out, with a certain design, and then as you go, you realize, oh, we need to shift some things. Have there been things that you've needed to shift in order to make the program more effective or more sustainable?
For us, the only thing we had to shift was just the attendance, going from keeping it only refugees to opening it up to a broader group of students. Other than that, the program design we have pretty much kept the same.
Okay.
So we did have to shift it quite a bit. So, for example, we're implementing it into offices. So we've started in the Silver Spring office, which in terms of trafficking, as well as
Hey, Nisha, I'm going to interrupt
refugee
you.
population, but it's implemented in Baltimore. We have these more specialized. Yeah.
Hey, Nisha, I think you're breaking up quite a bit. I don't know if it would be possible for you to maybe call in, mute your phone and then call in on the phone line. We might have a better connection with you doing that.
Yeah, I apologize.
No problem. We'll go back to Helen for now. Helen, there was a question about if you're paying clients for their projects or just connecting them to employers, and what did you mean by giving them their first paycheck?
So, for example, we have this lady who we make the small bags for. So she brings us the project, and then we pass out the project to our students. They get paid per piece, but it all comes through us. So the woman whose project it is will pay us, and then we pay our students. And it depends on the project, but usually they get paid per piece.
Okay. Great. Thanks for that answer. Another thing that several people are bringing up is the issue of childcare, and I would imagine that would be on both, while they're participating in the program, as well as perhaps once they have some employment. And so, how have you navigated the childcare challenge with your clients?
So at Refugee One, we're fortunate enough to have childcare provided for our students in our English classes, and so we've also allowed our students in the sewing classes to bring their children along. We don't provide anything for after they get employment, but a lot of them are doing these projects at home. So they do them while the kids are at school or at night when they're sleeping.
Great. That's a great example of kind of what we're talking about when we say alternative career pathways is, rather than trying to force some clients into a certain mold of sort of our traditional jobs we have to offer, figuring out what's actually going to work for them. And of course, it's easier said than done, but it is happening. And apparently 50% of you are working on it. So that's awesome. What about, this is another question related to barriers. What about the language barrier? Did you use interpreters for the classes? How have employers or artists that you're working with, Helen, been able to work with women who may not be proficient in English?
So what we usually do, actually for all our employment, when somebody starts a job, we usually send an interpreter to do an initial orientation. And then after that, they're pretty much, on their own. In our classes, we have interpreters come in for the first class, where we talk about safety, rules of the class, expectations, all that kind of stuff, just to make sure that everybody understands the ground rules. After that, because sewing is such a visual activity, we have really had very little problem with people understanding when they are shown things. We've also been fortunate in always ending up with one person who speaks English, who's able to help. So it really has not presented itself as a barrier for us. Our clients who work at Dearborn Denham, they work there full time. And fortunately, there's other Arabic speakers there who also speak English. So so far, things have worked out.
Mm-hmm. Great. Let's see. We had a question about volunteers, integrating volunteers into your programming. I'm not sure if we have Nisha back on the line yet. Nisha, are you back with us?
I am.
Have you guys been successful, or has it been important to you to integrate volunteers into your program?
I would say with our program, the most important contribution volunteers have been able to give have been that additional support needed. So for example, going with clients to like job interviews, providing that additional English support. We do have a family mentor program that we refer clients to, and they get that like extra support of someone coming to their home. But for clients that can come sort of get out of the house a bit more, we had a volunteer that would give them extra coaching or hold sessions to focus on different interview topics or different things like transportation orientations that were really key to providing.
Great, and your audio sounds so much better. I'm really glad you called in. Helen, what about you? What about volunteers at Refugee One? Is that part of the program model or not?
Yes, very much so. We have volunteer English teachers who come in once a week to each class, and we do also have just assistants in our sewing classes. We have 10 students per class, which can get to be a lot if people are having trouble with their machines. Some people learn at faster rates than others, so having an extra set of hands in each class really does help the teacher. So yes, volunteers are extremely important.
Great. So we have a really interesting question here from Nadia. It's a little bit long, but I'm going to read all of it and then see what you all have to share about this. She says, how do you implement gender-specific programming while also helping clients integrate into U.S. cultural norms? Also, how do you avoid perpetuating gender inequity when you develop non-traditional paths for women? So a pretty deep question here. But yeah, it's a good question. Do you all have any thoughts?
I mean,
on that?
I would respond by saying that the jobs that people get from our program are very much part of the American culture. It's not something that only immigrants or refugees do. So it's not at all unusual for an immigrant or for an American to be working as a tailor. So it's all part of the integration process by having them working in, even though they are different to some of the traditional employment areas that we usually place refugees, they are still within the American culture. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Nisha?
Yes. So that was really interesting. So with regards to integrating them into the job market, that's what our program was focused on. So rather than, I guess it was an alternative approach to integration into the job market rather than alternative pathway. So the goal is to get them integrated, to get them working, to either be providing supplemental income for themselves or for their families. So within that larger context, how do we avoid perpetuating inequity? It was really just, again, making sure we're watching ourselves and analyzing our programs, as well as listening to sort of experts or people who've implemented programs. We did really tap into the IRC's gender equity resources, our TAs, as well as API GBV, which is an organization in California. They provided sort of a cultural knowledge or technical assistance about different communities we're working with. We're working with a large special immigrant population, so we wanted to make sure that our interventions were culturally appropriate as well as do no harm. So just again, I also worked with a professor who's kind of an expert on refugees and migration when we were creating the pilot program and used it as sort of my thesis for graduate school. So just again, like making sure that we're being as informed as possible, and then looking at both, client experience in our program as well as the data as to whether things are successful.
Great, thanks, Nisha. And just on the note of technical assistance, definitely, I'd encourage you all, if you do need assistance in thinking more about how to promote gender equality or gender equity in your programs, definitely submit a technical assistance request to Switchboard. It doesn't have to be employment related. In fact, as Nisha mentioned, the IRC has developed a lot of great materials on gender equality and gender equity, and probably you would end up talking to a subject matter expert on those particular topics, and so definitely submit a TA request if you're interested in that. I wanted to go to a question from Chris, which is another really interesting question. He says, what tips would the panelists have for men in the workplace to encourage gender transformation to not only support our female colleagues and clients, but also help to correct harmful gender ideas among men? And that also reminds me of when I was doing research for this webinar and for the info guide that we just published. One of the characteristics of gender transformative programs was that oftentimes it engages men in discussions with women, and kind of there's a co-ed approach to tackling these issues. And so any tips for men either in the workplace or any ways that you've engaged men in your programming on these issues?
I definitely have ideas. So with regards to what we've seen be successful in our program has been working with the husbands. I think especially when you're working with a variety of different cultures, if you don't want to impose, or our goal is not to impose like our values on other people, but we do have to, make sure that we're promoting gender equity. And I think that gets complicated because each location, each place where people come from have different goals or ideas of what that is. And so the ways men can kind of support that is definitely working with men, working to educate themselves about gender inequities. And I think the biggest thing is to pay attention. So a lot of times when you're working with male colleagues, sometimes, they won't notice something. Maybe you won't notice like, hey, it's really important that we get this childcare voucher through, that we apply for this childcare. Because if we don't, if there's a gap in services, then, the woman won't be able to access English class. This is her only opportunity to access employment. So paying attention is key, as well as working with other men and making sure that, it's not so much to convince them or beat them over the head with it, because, when you're coming to a new place, I think cultural change is a navigation between multiple factors, and we don't want to force anything on anyone, but to make sure we reinforce if someone says, hey, this is something I want, that we're providing that service to them and that we're paying attention to women's needs.
Great, thanks, Nisha. Helen, did you have any thoughts?
Not too many, because we already, haven't worked with too many men, but we've had a few men in the program, and we've really tried to. I think what they've learned from being in it, the classes, is that women can do the same as they can do. Women can earn the same as they do. So I think for the men who have been in the program, it's been really good for them to be, just treated like a woman as well, where the job opportunities are the same for both of them. But it is, like I mentioned before, it was important for us, for some of our female students, to get their husbands' kind of approval that they could be in the class.
Great. Well, we're going to wrap up this conversation in just a few minutes, and we're going to share some resources that we've found helpful. But I did just want to ask our panelists, have there been any resources as you've designed these these programs. I know, Nisha, you mentioned some things from the IRC, but even, outside of refugee work specifically, workforce development resources or reports or things like that. Anything that you would recommend to our listeners in terms of things to look at in this topic area that have been helpful to you?
So we based our classes on some other models of other programs that are around the country and around Chicago, but we never really came across any resources that we actually used. A lot of it was just from our own beliefs of what would work.
Yeah, so we did a lot of research when we were we were creating this program. Again, it was a graduate thesis that, we got definitely some great technical assistance from an academic here from American University, which is really great. But also, again, I just like to shout out the IRC's gender equity resources. We have a gender equity toolkit, which was really great and really helpful when we were first implementing the program, as well as I think our cultural resource and exchange core. They did provide some resources as well. I believe UNHCR had some resources online that were super helpful. For us, it was really important to, because we're working with such diverse populations, it's really important to kind of understand what perspectives they were coming from, coming from displacement, coming through that process into resettlement, what kinds of issues are coming with them, and what kinds of dynamics are going to be in the communities we're working with. That way we could, make sure that our services were appropriate.
Great, thanks for sharing those. All right, last question. So where do both of you hope things go from here? Are you considering other pathways? Is there new programming or new opportunities that you see in terms of creating innovative programming for women? Where do you hope to go in the next year or two?
So for our side, the program funding was transitioned out. However, we were able to sort of leverage all of the research that we did, all of the work that we did into finding new funding for programming. It is much smaller funding, but we look forward to using a lot of the knowledge that we gained from this program to expand our services to women. What was really important, I believe, so from starting the program to finish, was a lot of times, as a staff or a service provider, you don't believe that you can implement program. You don't believe that, it'll actually work. And it was really great to see that it actually worked. And so with that data, with that knowledge and that institutional knowledge that we built, we're really excited to incorporate that into other program applications or other funding applications.
And for Refugee One, well, first of all, we're hoping we're going to find more funding so we can keep the program alive. And also, we just hope to find more opportunities for our students, more opportunities probably that they can do at home, because that is definitely the preferred job for them. And we will be moving our offices within the next year, and so we will have to find a new sewing space as well. So that's going to be our next challenge.
All right, well, thank you both for your presentations, as well as sharing your insight with us during the Q&A time. And we're gonna share some of the resources that we've put together as we've prepared this webinar, as well as the info guide that we mentioned. We do wanna encourage you all again to check out our new information guide, supporting the career pathways of female clients. A lot of it will be similar to this webinar, but it goes into some more details, shares some more specific practical ideas, and then highlights some of these same resources and maybe a couple different ones as well. So check that out. Also, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with CORE. They're the Cultural Orientation Resource Exchange. And they actually have an Employment for Refugee Women fact sheet and lesson plan. And I just put the main website here. When I send out the follow-up email, I will actually include the exact link, but couldn't all fit on the slide. So, and then we have a couple other ones, the U.S. Department of Labor Women's Bureau. They just provide a lot of resources, especially on legal rights of women and discrimination and things like that. So that may be helpful. And finally, not so much a resource, or maybe very much so a resource, but an actual organization, Dress for Success, which again, probably many of you are familiar with, outside of the refugee space specifically, but certainly a collaborative relationship that you might want to consider. I know they provide professional outfits for women for interviews. They do job readiness. They, basically just focus on helping women overcome barriers to employment. And so definitely something good to look at in your community. They have affiliates all over the country. And wanted to encourage you all to submit a TA request, technical assistance. Not everybody's familiar with the term technical assistance. Basically, all that means is if there's an area of your work that you're finding challenging, we might have a resource or a subject matter expert, or we might even be able to design something customized for you. And so let us know what it is that you need, and we'll let you know how we can help. Of course, we also want to hear not just about your challenges, but also about your successes, because we know that there's a lot of them. And so in addition to letting us know what you need help with, we would really love to know what you're doing that's working, so that we can amplify that out to folks around the country. And finally, before we sign off here, we want to stay connected with you. Here are the various ways that you can connect with us: our email address, Twitter, and our website. And we thank you for joining us today. I apologize for some of the technical hiccups in the middle there, but we recovered from that. And I trust that this was valuable content for you, and that the discussion that we had in Q&A time was also interesting and helpful. Please feel free to follow up with us with more questions. We do look at all the questions that were submitted after the fact, and we use that to, in some cases, respond individually. In other cases, we might look at several questions that maybe are on a certain theme and write a blog post or something down the road. But also feel free to email us with more questions, and we'll be happy to continue the conversation. So with that, we'll sign off. Thanks so much for attending, and keep up the good work.